you go to connect with God's green earth? Where have you been stopped in your tracks, or lost in wonder, or left momentarily speechless by the magnitude of the cosmos, or by the sheer determination of a single ant carrying a dinner twice his size across the rugged terrain? Where do you go to connect with the flora and the fauna? I remember standing on the dunes in a driving rainstorm once and feeling a profound sense of awe as the waves crashed and the water ran down my face. I remember being surprised by a fox on the dirt road that connected her habitat and mine. I stopped, she ran, unaware or unconcerned. And the time I rounded the bend on the path down by the library and met a red-tailed hawk perched right there on the rail. I remember standing in my cross-country skis in the middle of a remote and snowy grove of aspen trees, keenly aware that what I saw as a stand of individual trees was actually a single massive organism connected through the roots somewhere beneath my skis. And I remember sitting on a jagged black rock at sunset, glowing lava pouring into the sea, as my host remarked, "That's my island home, getting bigger." So many moments I could name. How about you? When have you been reminded that we are a part of a larger project, members in an ecosystem both vast and somehow intimately interconnected? I wonder if it's a universal experience, that feeling of reverence that gets triggered by wild places, or maybe not. Obviously, there are plenty of people who would rather admire the view through a window than get outside into the elements, where the allergies and the insects and the other discomforts threaten. Still, I suspect that many, maybe even most of us, have experienced at least a fleeting feeling of kinship with a wild creature or a wild place. When you found those earthworms in your vegetable garden and thanked them for their good work. When you rested your weary back on a sun-baked rock after a long hike, or floated in the salty sound. When you leaned in to listen to the breeze that caused the trees to whisper to each other. At moments like those, it's easy for me to believe that all our lives are intertwined with our non-human kin. In the language of the Lakota, mitaki wasi, we are all related. I was a guest on the Rosebud Reservation in South Dakota for a brief time several years ago. And during my visit, I used that phrase to greet people and to say thank you and to conclude a prayer the way that we use amen. Mitaki wasi. Mitaki wasi. It is a reminder that we are not alone in this place, that we are linked not only to each other, but to the rock, the eagle, the wind, and the river. This is biologically true. We share at least some of our DNA with all living creatures, including plants. Fun fact, we have 85% of our DNA in common with a zebrafish, and about 35% of our DNA in common with rice. What's more, We all share an environment, an ecosystem which is most healthy when it is most diverse. And yet, our Christian faith has not always been kind to the rest of God's creation. We have misread that famous verse back in the book of Genesis, the one that says that we should fill the earth and subdue it. We have taken those words as license to subjugate the rest of creation. We've used them to justify the over-extraction of minerals, the destruction of natural habitats, and the hostile takeover of lands that did not belong to us. It is our manifest destiny, argued our ancestors. Over and over, Christians have contended, often forcefully, that the rest of creation is ours to consume. And like a bull in a china shop, or a fisher cat among the chickens, we have left devastation in our wake. What would happen if we flipped the script? If we took a page from our indigenous cousins and regarded the wild places as relatives rather than resources, maybe even relatives with something to teach us. There is wisdom in the rocks and the trees. Did you know that rocks have memories? A Lakota teacher I met in Chicago once reminded me that rocks literally contain the memories of millennia imprinted within their structures, the residue of times long past, history's fingerprints, if you will. So if all the voices kept silent, the rocks really could cry out. In the words of Job, read this morning by Lucas, ask the animals, and they will teach you. And the birds of the air, and they will tell you. Ask the plants of the earth, and they will teach you. And the fish of the sea will declare to you. What would we learn if we listened intently to our non-human cousins? The brief blooming crocus teaches me that everything has its season. The small but fierce honey badger, that size isn't everything. And the lorikeets pictured on your bulletin this morning, that sometimes you need to show off your colors. The list of lessons is long. But first among them may be this, that we are interconnected, that we impact one another's lives in ways you might not even expect. Did you know that the wolves can change a river? In 1995, wolves returned to Yellowstone National Park. Prior to that, they'd been hunted until they disappeared from those protected lands, and the deer took over. When the wolves were first reintroduced, a fascinating thing unfolded. First, the wolves reduced the overabundant population of deer and elk. But that's not all. They also changed the behavior of those animals, who stopped grazing out in the open where they were exposed along the banks of the river. As a result, grasses, and then shrubs, and then trees began to grow back. Some trees quintupled in size over the course of just a year or two. Songbirds returned to nest in those trees, and then came the raptors who preyed on the songbirds. The beavers came back because they like to eat trees and build with them. And they built habitats hospitable to otters and ducks and fish and amphibians and reptiles. The wolves killed some of the coyotes, and so the population of rabbits and mice increased, and that attracted more badgers and foxes and weasels And the bears came back to eat the berries on the bushes and some of the deer carcass. And most remarkable of all, the river itself changed. Those new trees and those shrubs stabilized the riverbank. With less erosion, the water got deeper and the river got more established and settled in its course. And so the wolves, small in number, transformed the entire ecosystem, including its physical geography. The phenomenon, and there will be a quiz later, is called a trophic cascade. It's an ecological process that starts with the keystone species, the one at the top of the food chain, and cascades all the way to the bottom. Wolves are a keystone species. They have a greater influence on the whole ecosystem than do some other species. Prairie dogs are another keystone species. So are starfish and whales. Learning about those wolves and the river got me thinking, where do we humans fit in this ecosystem? Clearly, we're at the top of the food chain, so are we a keystone species? I Googled it, and I found an article in Atlantic Monthly about Bob Payne, the biologist who coined that term, keystone species. For years, Payne ignored the impact of humans on the environment that he studied, but late in life, he came to realize that people are what he called a hyper-keystone species. In other words, we influence the influencers, those wolves and the whales and all the rest. And so we impact the world around us in far-reaching ways that can be difficult to map. Just for starters, according to the article, in the Northwest Atlantic, we overfished the big sharks, releasing smaller sharks and rays from predatory control, and so they devoured the shellfish and caused a century-old scallop fishery to completely collapse. In Ghana, we killed off lions and leopards, allowing the baboons to flourish. The baboons then ate other primates, the small antelopes, the birds, and even crops, forcing local villagers to enlist the school-aged children as crop guards. How would you like to be guarding your crops against baboons? In both cases, the direct consequence of our action was clear, but it took a lot of work to understand everything that happened afterwards. So what is our response to all of this? As people of faith, as Christians looking for an alternative to subduing the earth. Our Psalms say that earth itself sings God's praises. After the flood, God made a covenant not just with humans, but with all creation. In the book of Joel, God reassured the soil, told the soil, the dirt, not to be afraid. And in the book of Job, we are told that the animals and the birds have wisdom to share. Clearly, we are not the only creatures formed and embraced by God. Mitaki wasan, we have siblings whose welfare is bound up with ours, but we're also not created equal. It turns out we humans have a disproportionate influence. We humans have the power to destroy an entire ecosystem, to throw everything out of balance, or to sustain it. Perhaps that's why God commanded the first humans to have dominion. Maybe she meant that we needed to own our role as a hyper-keystone species. an influencer of influencers, and so tread lightly on the earth. The next time you have one of those moments, the next time you are startled by the brush of butterfly wings on your arm, or bite into a sun-ripe peach, or admire a breathtaking desert view, consider the role we all play in looking after those cousins. When you walk out of church this morning and feel the ground under your feet, breathe in the air when you get your next drink of water or make your next purchase, repeat this prayer in your hearts, maybe even out loud. Mitaki wasan. We are all related. And then, together, let's discover what it means to live as if it were so.